Okay, it looks like we are all here, ready to go. I want to welcome everybody coming to the Technical Advisory Committee meeting. This is our first opportunity to be here at this location for us to have the live recording. And I just wanted to let everybody know again that you do have the opportunity to come up to the speaker right up here for your comments and questions. And also to members of the advisory committee to please keep your microphones towards you and use them as needed. If they go too far out, there will be a reaction with the other microphones in front of us, and that might cause problems for Jean to be able to hear us because she is on the phone and ready for us to begin. So I will go ahead and get this started. Timing is 1:09, and we will go ahead and get going here. And I think I hit this right now, yes? We'll go ahead and get started. So for first item, I'll call to order and name. If I name your name, please let me know if you are here. Eddie Teasdale.
Present.
Don Quist.
Here.
Don Decker.
Present.
Earl Wilson.
Here.
And Tim Parker.
Here.
And myself, Adam Bingham, here as well. I did receive notification from Scott O'Neill, Stephen Bork, Michelle Anderson, and Wade Major that they will be unable to attend today. But the people that are here, we still do meet the quorum needs. All right, we'll go to item number 2 for public comments. I'll give this a read for you all. This time is reserved for the public to address the committee about matters not on the agenda. No action will be taken on non-agenda items unless authorized by law. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person, and I welcome you to come up front. And also, please go ahead and state your name.
Thank you, Adam. My name's Elaine Mead. At the last Groundwater Authority meeting, I asked if there was any plans of capturing any of the runoff water that DWP plans to release in our valley. I did not get any comments back or acknowledgement of the statement, so I would ask this group if there has been any thought process on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Adam,
yes.
I can respond to that.
Go ahead.
I asked Carl Simons at BLM when we had the round table meeting last Thursday if there had been anything released yet, and he said no, but DWP is talking with them.
Do you want to mention the BW Brackish Water Group?
Thank you, Eddie. Go ahead.
No, I don't know if it's premature, Don, but we the Brackish Water Group meeting today, we were talking about how can we not only take advantage of those releases for obvious reasons, but also try to monitor the impacts those might have on, ultimately the aquifer. So we were kicking around ideas about how we could sort of set up a monitoring network to kind of capture the response. So I think that's probably going to come up a little bit later. But so we are thinking about it.
Okay. Thank you for that information, Earl, and Ada, your response. Thank you. Any other comments with the group here for this question? Okay. Go ahead, please.
Jean, can I make a comment?
Yes, go ahead, Jean.
Part of the Prop 1 funding was getting some data loggers, and we have some data loggers. We currently purchased some data loggers for this project, and at the last, I'm getting some feedback, sorry. At the last TAC meeting, I spoke with Pat Quist about a well nearby the Freeman Wash that we could put a data logger down to monitor the stream alluvium if that were the location, which is a typical location that release occurs. We haven't set up all the logistics, but know that we have the data logger, and we've been watching that.
Good. Thank you for that information.
Yeah, I think it's going to come up later on in the agenda, and we'll bring it up. Or I'll make it come up.
All right, back to the public.
My name is Sophia Merck. Everybody calls me Sam. I represent myself. 2 years ago, when DWP did do the release of the water, they are required by law to give the amount of water that they are releasing to the BLM. BLM consequentially made the release water available to the public. And since we do have a representative that's supposed to be on the GSA, though I noticed that he wasn't at the GSA meeting this last time, one of the things we should do is be able to contact him and be able to get those release numbers. But it is available to the public. Thank you.
Thank you for that information, Sam.
Hello, everybody. Lee Knutson here with WellIntel. I just want to give a quick status update on the community groundwater monitoring project. I installed 5 systems yesterday. The well owners are pretty excited about getting new information about their well, and we're already finding some interesting things, like the water levels in some wells are near the bottom, within 20 or 30 feet. So it's good that these folks are keeping track of their water levels in real time. They've all filled out well registration forms, so I have those in my briefcase. I'm going to get them all together and then submit them. I'll give them to Steve. And yeah, I'm having fun with it. I like brokering the domestic well owners, the relationship between the well owners and the Groundwater Authority. So far so good. If you guys have any questions, you can come talk to me.
I have a quick question. Can I ask now? I will. What's the protocol
Yes.
for releasing some of that information, just to sort of share it? Is that sort of, are you planning to maybe in a month come back and give an update on what we're seeing, or is that?
Yeah.
Has it been thought about?
To start, we can just work together on a one-on-one basis, and I can show you the data. But at some point, I'm going to make it available to anyone with the Groundwater Authority.
And if he gives it to us, we can certainly report it.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
important, as we start to kind of
Yep.
go through this process.
Yeah, we'll be working together. I have
And-
4 more to install tomorrow. 1 more is still available. So if you guys have somewhere that you'd like to place it, I could do that Friday. So
And this is then all 10, and then part of the 60 days setup where they can monitor and we'd see how great these things are going.
right.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you for this information.
You're welcome.
It is exciting.
Don Zadiba, Indian Wells Valley Water District, and just responding to Sam's comment, I was in contact with LADWP in 2017 when they were doing the releases, and they did release 2,090 acre feet during that time period. Actually, today I sent an email to LADWP requesting that if they do plan to release in this basin, that they give us some idea of a schedule so we could plan to be able to monitor what they're doing and the impact of what they're doing. So I hope to hear from them really soon. But they've been very open in letting us know what they're doing in the past. So I think they'll do that again this time. So that's 2090 is what they released. And actually, they started. I looked back this morning. They were releasing water in 2017 in March. So I wouldn't be surprised if pretty soon they start releasing it here. Snowpack this year is about the same, if not more, than in 2017. So probably any time now we can expect to see some water coming into the valley.
Thank you for that information, Don. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Mallory Boyd, self-interest represented. That interest might change in the near future, but currently it's just me. A follow-up on the topic that's been raised a couple times today on the releases of DWP water. I'm encouraged. I agree. The snowpack probably lends to another release this year. Wouldn't it be nice if we could have it released into channels that we think more directly impact our aquifer? We don't know much about the El Paso area that Freeman Gulch feeds, but we do know a little bit more about Sand Canyon and the other canyons north, which I think all have release points as well. And perhaps gradual releases out of those might have more direct effect and our central and northern water storages there, where we don't have the problem with saline and intrusion and such. Anyway, it just seems to me it might be an opportunity to reach out to DWP and see if they're flexible on where they release the water in the future, and if we could use the intelligence that's been gathered about what we know about the current replenishment routes, which might be the better ways to bring our water in. I'm sure DWP doesn't think about that when they release it, but should be something that we could help them with. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other public comments? Okay, we will go ahead and move on to item number 3, Water Resource Manager's discussion of the draft GSP sections. Again, this is the work in progress, so I will go ahead and turn this over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Adam. This thing's on, right? Am I on? Hello. Oh, it's on.
Maybe pull it a little bit closer so you don't.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. We don't have a whole lot on the agenda today. I have a good discussion later on this LADWP water and what kind of support we can provide to that, or who can provide support to channelize the water and get the water we want. I think it's a good discussion we should have today. The only thing I have to say is this new venue, we're a little nervous about it because we really, really like the other venue at the Water District that was one-on-one. We could actually talk to each other. So what I really don't want to have happen is this get so formal that we lose that, because we want to have everybody's input here. So maybe not so much just standing up and yelling. we did over there. But certainly this should be one-on-one. So everybody feel comfortable. Again, I don't like this for the TAC, but it's what we have. It's what they decided to do. But everybody should feel comfortable participating. We need your participation. So I want to make sure everybody knows we support that type of venue. So
Steve, if I may interrupt real quick, I just wanted also to state that because this is a new location for both TAC and PAC and all this operating together, that we do have the idea that we'll make an aim for the 4 o'clock timing so that we can finish up and then get everything ready for the PAC meeting this afternoon as well. So I'm just encouraging everybody to think about that as well.
Yeah, move along. So we do have Jean Moran on the phone. She's going to be doing shallow well impact. She's kind of completed most of her work there, so I think that's going to be good. Jeff's here to do some updates. That's the real meat of our stuff today. Before we get done, I do want to let you folks know where we're on in the big picture with some of the technical work. Maybe as part of Jeff's modeling, we'll go into that to see where things are, trying to pull all this together as a group between our technical folks. And as everybody knows, we have an attorney's allocation group working. So I'll try to let everybody know what I know about where we are today. But we'll get that done today. But right now, I think Jeff's going to start us off with the sustainable management actions, primarily the modeling stuff we've done.
Yeah, and what I have today is really a recap of the modeling that we've done to date. And we had put it on the agenda to remind us all and have this setting as a basis for talking about what modeling we're going to do going forward. So you've seen, if you've attended the meetings, you've seen these results before. We did a baseline run where we asked the major pumpers, if there was no sigma and we had plenty of water in the ground, what would you be doing going forward as far as pumping? And the 2020 column there with the responses we got, and it was a total of about 35,000 acre feet is where it would be in 2020. And then with no other considerations, there'd be some growth in that, and by 2040 it would be at 36,700, and then by 2070 maybe as high as 38,000. So that's what we modeled as a baseline, no action scenario that we had intended and have used to compare to some of the management scenario results from our management runs. The water budget in the baseline, which is the far right column there, the TAC spent a great deal of time talking about what recharge to use, natural recharge to use in the model, and you've all heard it before. It's 7,650 acre feet a year is what's in there. The pumping for this baseline scenario starts let's see, this is the average, sorry, over the 50-year period that was modeled. The average is a little under 37,000 acre-feet a year of pumping. The ET, about 1,600 acre-feet a year, and about 40 acre-feet a year of outflow to salt wells. So we had a change in storage on average over that 50-year period of 31,000 acre-feet a year of depletion of storage. And these are the resulting groundwater contours from that baseline run. In the part of the basin where all the wells are at, we had, for a good portion of it, 60 to 70 feet of reduction in groundwater levels. Almost all of the wells saw at least a 50-foot reduction in groundwater levels. These are the hydrographs from what we call the different management areas that all show the same pattern except for the El Paso area. All declines on the order of 50 to 70 feet. El Paso, of course, no production in there of any significance, so it's pretty much a flat line at this scale. This is the change in storage. The blue line is the cumulative change in storage, and under that scenario, about another 1.5 million acre feet would be taken out of storage in 50 years. And this is the simulated, you've seen this before, the simulated outputs from the wells and what the model was able to do. We asked it to start at, like I say, about 36,000 acre feet every year and go up to around 38,000 acre feet a year. And after 45 years or so, the wells could not produce that quantity of water the way they were constructed in the model itself. So we started having wells that could not produce that amount of water anymore. So that was the baseline run. What if we weren't going to do anything to manage the basin? Just as an early test of the model and to see how the basin would respond, DRI, the modelers, did a run where they just ramped down all of the pumping proportionately equal to the natural replenishment of 7,650, and assume that happened in year 2017 or so. How would the basin respond? And that's the hydrographs we see here. It immediately started to turn around. We saw some rebound, and then it stabilized over the 50 years. We also did some modeling with total dissolved solids to look at water quality, and we applied this to the baseline model run. This shows the relative sources of TDS into the basin. This shows the initial conditions in what have been grouped into three different layers, the shallow, the intermediate, and the deep. And we'll start to walk through the results. This is the shallow results. And if you look at this, certainly out in the northeastern area, you see a big movement of the concentration of TDS. That's over 1,000 moves farther west, but not significantly into the well fields for the most part, although you do see some of the green there is 500 to 1,000 parts of TDS, and you do see that along Brown Road moving into some of the wells over this period, and then down in the Ridgecrest area you see the same thing as a larger area is impacted by 500 to 1,000 TDS concentration. And then this is in the intermediate zone. There again are some changes around the Ridgecrest area.
And again, this is baseline only at this time.
Yeah, this is the baseline.
Okay.
And we're just taking a snapshot of what the initial conditions are and what it is at the end of 50 years of modeling. And then there's the deep zone. And then this shows really just the trends or the changes, the rate of change greater than 5 milligrams per liter per year. So we saw the greatest, at least in the shallow, the greatest area was out east of Brown Road and out in the China Lake Weapons Station area. And then in the intermediate, it's kind of scattered along the center and southeastern part of the basin. And then the one on the left is the deep, and then a kind of a composite of all the zones. So our first management scenario that we ran, we just wanted to have a model run to test some of the concepts that were being kicked around about how to manage the basin. Some of them came out of the allocation group, and again, none of them were agreed to. They were just concepts that have been thrown around in those meetings, so we wanted to see how the basin reacted to some of them. That included cliff pumping for some of the agricultural pumping, and cliff pumping in this scenario was modeled as the pumping would continue at its current level for 4 years, and then it would basically go to zero for some of the ag. We ramped down the rest of the pumping over a 20-year period, except for the Navy and the de minimis pumpers over that period to get down to the safe yield of the basin or the natural replenishment. And then we included the concept of leasing, of there being a market where you could lease your allocation. And in our model, it was largely from ag out to back over to the water district and to Searles to some degree. In this scenario, we had imported water becoming available in 2030. That imported water was all recharged in the El Paso area. And then to utilize that water, since it can't flow from to any great degree from the El Paso area into the main pumping areas, we had recovery wells that would pump it up and assume pipelines to then take and distribute it to the water district and to Searles as it was needed. As the ag leases started to decline because there was a ramp down in the pumping, the water district and Searles could use additional water, so in this it's assumed they're using the imported water. And on the order of 15,000 acre feet a year was recharged in El Paso and then pumped back out every year. And this is a graph showing the pumpings. We actually started, I think, closer to 30,000 acre feet a year as our initial starting point. There's some ramp down for 4 years. Then you see another decline, which is the cliff pumping stopping at that point. The pumping falls off the cliff and a portion of the ag it doesn't pump anymore. And then a gradual ramp down of pumping to the 7,650 acre feet a year. And the resulting contours for that are on the right. We see declines of 10 feet over that 50-year period. Over some of the basin up on Brown Road, we actually see a increase of 10 feet in the groundwater level. And then you see pretty dramatic increases and decreases down in the El Paso area from our recharge and recovery of fairly large quantities of water every year. And then we've got some hydrographs from the different management areas out in the Navy area. When we get the pumping down to the 7650, you see the declines have stopped, and we stabilize and actually start to see some recovery over the period, and that's pretty much the case in the hydrographs in all the management areas. That one declines a little bit longer before it stabilizes. A little bit more of a rebound in that area. And out on Brown Road, we actually see the trend of declining water levels stop sooner than in the other areas. And that's because of the cliff pumping assumption that we built into it. There's a large drop in ag pumping the fourth year out, so we see it start to the trend of declining levels stop as soon as we do that. And then as water is leased over into the water district in Searles, it actually continues to recover. And then this is El Paso, and this monitoring point happens to be near where the recharge was at, so we see pretty large increases in water levels. And then this is the change in total storage in the basin. The blue line, again, is the baseline that we looked at before, 1.5 million that's removed. This management scenario shows that over the 50-year period, about 200,000 acre-feet of water is removed from storage. In management scenario number 2, we had some step downs in pumping at 2025 and 2030, and I'll go over exactly what those step downs were in another slide. We had imported water beginning in 2030. In this case, we had direct use of imported water by the city and by Searles starting in 2030, and we had a spreading component over by the Inyo Kern Airport where we did surface water spreading and we didn't need to do any recovery. The water moved through the basin to offset reductions in pumping. And then we had recycled water for injection and other uses starting in 2025. So the reductions we had in 2025, we had the water district and the mutuals and the Inyo Kern Community Service District assumed that their reduction in 2025 would be 10%, Kern County would reduce by 30%, and agriculture by 40%. That in 2030, when imported water becomes available for direct use, Searles and the water district would stop pumping under this scenario. So our total pumping is reduced to about 13,650 acre-feet a year. And the reason it's higher than the natural replenishment that we've talked about several times, the 7,650, is we make up the difference through the surface spreading by augmenting the yield of the basin by surface spreading of imported water. And this is that scenario water budget for different periods. And if you look out at the far right-hand corner, or far right-hand side column there, the last part of the modeling period, we're losing about 4,000 acre-feet a year at that point. On average. And these are the contours on the right from that model run of some similarity to the first modeling run. We see 10 to 20 feet of decline around the basin, but with some other results there where we're recharging near the Inyo Kern Airport. We see increases in the water levels of 10 to 20 feet, and the same in the southwest area. We see about a 10-foot, and then in the Ridgecrest area, about a 10-foot increase. And there's the hydrographs again for the Navy. We see stabilization about 12 years out in this scenario, almost 15. And then recovery, and similar to most degrees in the other hydrographs. There we see a little bit of difference. You see a much steeper increase when we reach a certain point, which may be the influence of the surface spreading that we're doing. And again, we didn't model any changes in El Paso, so you don't see any impact on the groundwater levels there. And the change in storage here, the red line at the top, is a little over 200,000 acre-feet in this scenario over that modeled period.
What's the total storage in the basin? Do you know, off the top of your head?
I've heard different numbers. I don't know a number off the top of my head.
I can provide it some numbers. The Kunkel and Chase paper from the 1960s provided a value of 2 million acre feet That was assuming 200 feet of dewatering. In the 90s, there was a renewed interest in reviewing that again, and the Bureau of Reclamation study did re-examine that issue and reduced that number to 1.8 million as a result of the discoveries of additional substantial amounts of saline water along North Brown Road. And so that's the number. If you take this is an additional comment related to that. If you take the production numbers that the various parties reported to the cooperative group through those years where that was being done, that stopped in 2016 or thereabouts, and the total pumping production that was reported was around 1.1 million acre feet. So that's subtracted off of 1.8 is 0.8 as of 2016 based on those numbers.
Well, the next part of the presentation was intended to be where are we going to go from here with pumping? What's our next modeling scenario? And I don't have a next modeling scenario to present to you.
Hold on just one moment for me.
Yep.
So with A and then item I, the sustainable management modeling scenarios, we're set with that. I just want to make sure there weren't any questions or comments from the public. I'll turn that over to you. Okay, thank you. Any other comments by committee members?
Yes.
Go ahead.
In the last modeling, let's see, it's page 16 here on the right side. You're still showing deficits up in the northwest. -10 and -20. And on the previous one, you were showing that we would actually have an increase of plus 10 feet up in that area. Can you explain that?
I think that's primarily because in the first scenario, we had cliff pumping for some of the ag, so a good portion of the ag went to zero after 4 years. And then the assumption in the model was almost all of the rest of the big ag would get leased over to the water district in the Searles. So in the first scenario, the pumping in the northwest area was greatly reduced. All the big ag pumping had stopped in that scenario by, I'm not sure how many years out it was, 10, 12 years out, all the big ag pumping had stopped. In this scenario, we had stepped the big ag pumping down by 40%, but it was still pumping at 60% of what they had been pumping. And I think so that's one of the reasons why, is there's a great deal more pumping in scenario 2 in that area than there was in scenario 1. I think one of the reasons we're not seeing even greater declines is because in scenario 2 is because we're doing a recharge, not exactly in that area, but we've got recharge in the general part of the basin that I think is offsetting some of that.
I think, Earl, it's the location of where the observation point is in the northwest corner. It's probably south, and maybe not as representative as it could be. So I think at some point we're going to want to see more, monitoring locations factored into some of these scenarios. But NR2 maybe is not as representative of the northwest as maybe another, like USBR 6S might be or something.
Yeah, I go along with that. We need to have more data from up in that area for sure, and in some other places too. And I still have a problem with mixing the steps and the cliffs in the modeling program here. It's not easy to grasp at times, so I understand what you're doing, making a water market and everything, but you haven't, in some cases, actually added one drop of water to the basin.
Well, we agree with the comment about that one monitoring point that's presented here doesn't tell you everything that's going on in that area. We agree with that. Well, we are looking at some additional wells that we can show in the future to get a better idea of that.
To clarify this, the model itself, of course, has the response of the basin, and the hydrographs that are shown are just examples, and it's really pretty easy to pull out additional hydrographs and examine their behavior.
Yep.
So there's nothing really missing except the exercise of doing the plots.
Yep.
Jeff, I think Earl mentioned that there's no real new water put in the basin. Actually, for both Model Run 1 and Model Run 2, you have imported water coming in. In Model Run 1, it goes to El Paso and then direct delivers. In Model Run 2, we have some direct delivery and we have some replenishment in the pumping zones, but not till 2030.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
And that is then what is being seen.
I do understand that, but I do see issues with doubling from 7,650 up to 15,000. So don't know how to address that. So
well, the second part of 3AI, I'm still on that, is an update about where we're at. As I mentioned, we don't have a modeling scenario to tell you that we're going to run next. The plan had been to go to the allocation group, the attorneys group, on March the 29th and get some feedback there and call an ad hoc meeting and then start pumping. And we went in with some thoughts on what might be modeled to talk to the group about based on what had been talked about before. But that didn't occur. We didn't come away with direction from that meeting on what we should model next. And I had put out Jim Markman, the Groundwater Authority Special Counsel, had put out a report on both the March 8 allocation meeting and the March 29th allocation meeting, and had some really good notes in there that I'd put out on the table for everybody to look at. But the path, as I understand it now, and these notes indicate that the agricultural producers were asked to talk amongst themselves and come back with their thoughts on, I think, what was presented to them as the words Jim Markman uses, most acceptable request for a delay or a deferral in cutting back pumping, and then what kind of ramp down of pumping might work. And it was phrased, that delay in pumping and that ramp down of pumping needed to look at limiting basin mining and limiting the harm to the shallow wells in the basin. That was part of the discussion that went on at that meeting. The intent was then, once the allocation group heard back from the agricultural interests, the ad hoc committee would be called together to talk about the details of what would be in a modeling run around that, and then we'd run that and bring it back to the ad hoc group and to the TAC. So that's where we think we're at right now.
So if I may, this in essence will be the next scenario, so scenario number 3.
That's right. The third out of our 4. We have 4 in the budget right now.
Yeah. Microphone. Yeah, Jeff and Steve, I just wanted to, we've talked about the allocation discussions and how that's potentially affecting the schedule. And that's a big concern. And at the same time, we don't want to rush the allocation discussions because that might rush into a place we don't necessarily want to go. And I just wanted to bring up a GSP. I'm not sure whether you've seen. It's a draft GSP that's a complete draft, Borrego. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Borrego Basin, but it's it has a lot of similarities. And I'm just going to, I'm not sure this is all accurate because I've just skimmed it, but it basically puts out a linear pumping ramp down over the 20 years and has management actions thrown in there, and it basically doesn't have an allocation defined per se, except everybody's got a linear ramp down. And then their actions include, I think the first 24 months of implementation include how they're going to kind of resolve it, was kind of the way I read it, with a training program, a voluntary agricultural following program, and whatnot. And so I'd encourage everybody on the TAC and Stetson to look at this. There may be some ideas that we come out of this where we can put something together without having to come out with a firm legal agreement. I don't know. I think there might be some opportunities there, but I think at any point it's a GSP that's done that I think is worth looking at anyway.
Tim, can you forward that to?
Yeah, I'll forward it to you, to me, to Steve and Jeff. I'll forward the link. I mean, it's pretty easy to find if you just search for it. But the other thing I wanted to point out was, and I think I brought this up before on the model, is under the model BMP, you're supposed to talk about uncertainty. And we spent a lot of time in the model group about what are we going to use for a recharge number. And although I would have preferred approaching it with a range, there's only so much money and so many runs you can do. But I think we have to think about that in terms of how we're using these, because there's quite a bit of uncertainty in terms of the recharge number and all the other assumptions that go into it. So I'm not sure how we do that, but that's just another thing to keep in mind. As the public looks at the model results and kind of it gets locked in their mind, that's reality. It's one scenario of reality in terms of the projections. So it's not necessarily how things are going to look. So I just think that's important to keep reminding the public of.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up with Tim. And Gene, I don't know if you can hear, I think at the next TAC meeting, we're going to start to talk about sort of measurable objectives and minimum thresholds and monitoring networks. But I think, a lot of that data is really how the basin's going to be managed. And so we really need to get that network kind of peer reviewed and everybody agree on which wells we're going to use. Because I think independent of what's going on in the modeling, we can start to set these thresholds and objectives tomorrow, and then you can refine them a little bit based on some of the scenarios. But I think those are going to be the wells that we're going to utilize to manage the basin, So I think at some point we need to, and I think we're going to touch on that a little bit later on the agenda, but it's not all model change in storage related. So.
No, I agree. Gene and I have been talking about the monitoring network that we need to use for the GSP. We, of course, will have monitoring wells to get data for the whole basin as we go forward, but there have to be what I'll call key wells with the criteria on them that we're going to use to report on our progress. And certainly that can be independent of the modeling and the allocation discussions. We can have all be looking at that and come to agreement on that. Enzo Brega, I have not seen their draft GSP. I'll be interested in looking at it. Their first plan, their A plan, was to get funding. I think it was federal. No, it was the state funding.
Proposition money.
Yeah, proposition money to buy out ag interests and fallow the land, and that bond did not pass. Right. So I did not know what.
Partially because of what they call pork money.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what their plan B is. What you described sounds kind of interesting.
Before we go any further, I have some comments too. The one thing about the monitoring well, in proceeding with that, task and proceeding with it is that it actually has some benefit to the task at hand that is the scenario modeling and the difficulties of getting everybody on board. I hear it too. Is that better, maybe? By focusing on the handful of wells that will be the monitoring wells and looking specifically at their behavior, That is really pretty obnoxious. Looking at those monitoring wells and their behavior may help us to further make further progress on the attorneys' agreements and so on. You're looking at more now at specific wells and specific behavior. It's not so nebulous. The other thing that I would like to say, there are other ways to do the basin management other than direct allocation, and the Borrego Springs TSP is an example. And the domestic well owners, probably a year ago, put together a draft plan for sustainability, which had limited distribution. We thought there was enough turmoil and confusion all through these months that it wasn't worthwhile bringing forward. But we've concluded that the time is now where we should, in fact, bring it forward. And the essence of that plan is that the groundwater pumping is not based on an allocation per se. It's based upon market forces. And you avoid the struggles, which are inevitable. No one wants to give up their allocation, if you will. But if that's not how it works on charging for water above the natural recharge. That water is compensated for at market prices, at imported water here prices. And you ramp up to that over a period of time. Those that have an economic condition where they can continue to pump can pay those fees. It also, and continue, those that can't won't. And so there will be a steady decline in the amount of water pumped. We won't reach our natural recharge and maintain present economies and lifestyles, but imported water, as we've assumed in all of these models, would be the final step in what we're proposing. And I have some copies of that, which maybe after the meeting, not to disturb any more here, anyone interested can have a copy of it. It's just a draft. It's not fully fleshed out, but the essence of the idea is there.
Another comment, Adam. And I've been trying to get this through, and I don't know if it's ever registered, but we need a higher tempo in our groundwater sampling for most of these ones that we have history for. And there are trends that you're going to see in between the beginning and end of the water year. So that's an important thing, to be able to see that.
Thank you, Don and Earl. So anything that you have that you would like for us to also see, you'll go ahead and send to me and then also to Stetson as well.
You will have today a solid hard copy, and of course I will always, as I always do, forward my written material. Don't worry.
And this is representative for the group that you represent for the technical side, yes?
Of course.
Okay, the domestic group, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
It's in the document is signed by the we call ourselves the administrative committee. We've signed it out, and since I say signed out, our names are on the document.
Okay, good. I think you should also send that to board members and also to the PAC as well.
It's already underway.
Thank you. Okay, we moving on to the shallow well impact analysis.
Yeah, sure. One quick thing.
Okay.
I told everybody that. I told everybody that I let them know where we're at with the allocation group and the technical group, and I probably should do that. Jeff went a long ways because we wrote up together, so we've talked about what we need to say today. So Jeff went a long ways to discussing where we're at and where we're going. But I want to make sure the TAC is aware, everybody on the TAC is aware, and the audience is aware, because most of the same people are going to the board meetings. We're in and Jeff really didn't talk about it, but we're getting into, and I think people are generally aware, we're getting into a bit of a jam on the GSP right now. We were moving along very well with the TAC and the modeling scenarios and developing a technical approach to resolving this, to pulling this together on what a plan might look like. We were moving along pretty well. The allocation group with the attorneys started a little later, and they were moving a little slower. And we actually, over the last probably 2 or 3 weeks, probably 3 weeks ago, we're starting to try and pull the groups together. And I think I've mentioned during the board meetings and probably these TAC meetings too, I've mentioned that, I recognize and we recognize that one of our jobs, our goals and our responsibilities right now is to try and bring the TAC work together with the allocation group to make something that fits for both of those. And up until about 3 weeks ago, we thought we were bringing those together. We actually, and they're still having the allocation meetings, but I just want to make sure that everybody here is aware that we're getting this out, that there's from our group, from our office and what we're trying to do, there is a certain amount of real frustration right now on what we need to do to go forward and how we're going to get there. And I'm hoping that over the next 7 to 10 days, that'll become more clear. I would really have hoped we had more for you today. That I thought we'd have this cleared up about a week or two ago. Maybe by the last attorneys meeting, I thought we were going to come out of that meeting with something more concrete, and we could share it with you today. On your agenda, you have an item which says, which I put on there. I was very encouraged at the time. Clear down on under C, item BC. Or,
is this 3C,
yeah,
the implementation?
3C, the implementation options. I had hoped to actually talk to you guys about that, so we'll get there, but I won't have much to talk about right now. But my point is there's a certain amount of frustration that we have in trying to go forward. We have 2 runs left with DRI under our budget. We don't want to run another run unless we have people generally on the same page, because whatever we run, we anticipate there will be at least one more, maybe more sort of fine-tuning runs when we get the results and say, well, we don't like this, we don't like that, well, how about this, or how about that? We need to run it again. And that's all the runs we have left. So we've put a hold on running any more model runs until we get these groups closer together. And I'll let you know that we recognize, and the job we have, whatever we bring forward, we've got to have the GA board, we've got board members that will approve it before it goes anywhere. And everybody's going to see it, but it's going to go out. But the board has to approve it. And we're getting some pushback on some of the approaches that we have from board members who are very, very engaged and very adamant about their positions. We're getting... most of you have heard, I'll call it the Panzer Plan. Most of you have heard the Panzer Plan, where we get down to health and safety. There is a big push. I'm letting you guys know there is a big push for health and safety, and the fact that there's a big push that we're getting back. I think you've heard John Vallejo at the board, a big push that the idea of getting imported water, really getting imported water, the practicality, is not that good. I'm not in that camp. I'm still optimistic, but there is a big push suggesting that imported water is a pipe dream. Pipe dream is probably a bad word. It's a pipe. I didn't mean that. It's a pipe dream for this area. I'm not in that position. I think that we wouldn't be looking at. We wouldn't have recommended hiring the water marketers if we didn't believe that. We believe there was an opportunity. So I'm not necessarily in that camp, but there are a lot of people in that camp, and there's a very strong pushback that we need to make. We need to have the GSP plan that we put together needs to be very aggressive. I'll just put it that way, very aggressive on reducing pumping. So we've stopped right now, and we're trying to get people together, because I don't want to go forward with something that one group wants and somebody else, that's not going to be acceptable. So that's kind of where we're at. There's been a position put out there that I want to make sure everybody's aware of, because you've all heard Nick's plan, and I heard it, I think the second meeting I came to, I heard Nick's plan that said we got to get it down to health and safety, safe yield. That was Nick's plan, and I've heard other people talk about it too. More recently, you've heard some board members talk about health and safety and the need to get pumping down to the safe yield, and we're hearing from that too. More recently, one of the concepts has been, and I want to make sure everybody's aware of it, is that with this, some of the things Jeff just showed today, the baseline pumping plan that showed after 45 years pumping at that level, recognizing that was a baseline plan that was doing nothing and a lot of pumping, more pumping than we're doing now, but it was anticipating a lot of pumping. So it's not as accurate as it could be for pumping going out 50 years. Even if we didn't do anything, it's probably a little high for that. I recognize that. We recognize that. But on the flip side, that's the only thing we have right now. We haven't run anything else. That's the only thing we have. And you notice when he showed that chart, he showed that at the end of 45, between 40 and 50 years, of those years, pumping dropped off because of water supply. And it's because construction, not necessarily we're at the bottom of the basin, but we're at the bottom of our current ability to realistically pump water with the wells that are there. So you're talking about pumping deeper or doing something different. So a lot of people took that very, very serious, a very, very big concern, and there's been a sort of a push back on that whole issue that has resulted in presenting to us the concept, and you're going to hear it more, the concept that there's really no amount of water going forward that's acceptable to produce out of this basin beyond the safe yield or a reasonable amount above that to sustain the community that we should be allowing, because basically what we're doing going forward is you're now drawing on the reserve that we have in this basin. That's the reserve that we have going forward. And without a real plan, without a real anticipated plan for imported water to supplement that, we can't afford to pump any more reserves than we absolutely have to going forward. That's a pretty aggressive plan. And that's primarily the reason why, well, I have one more thing. That's one of the reasons why we've kind of stopped and said we need some more direction. We can do whatever you want. We can model that. We can model, and I'm going to back up. We've modeled a lot of scenarios that involve very similar things that Tim talked about, ramping things down. We've modeled programs or plans or implementation with different alternatives. What they're talking about on this side is really not necessarily something that needs to be modeled so close, because it's very, very aggressive. So we've been working on modeling real plans. And this approach, which I'm not opposed to either, and it's the Ridgecrest community, it's your community. I'm not opposed to it either, but it is aggressive. It is very, very aggressive. When you start talking about not pumping any more out of this basin going forward, because it is your reserve, and we don't know whether or not you'll be able to replenish it with imported water. That's what we're hearing. So that's what we have in front of us, and right now, I'll just let you know what the schedule is. I don't want to talk too much out of school, because I'm allowed into these attorneys' meetings. They're confidential. I've always been a bad person about closed session, because I always come out and talk about what they talk about in closed session and get in trouble for it. But they're confidential, so we can't really talk about all the stuff that goes on there. But I got to be able to give you at least some of the general stuff. Is that as a result of the meeting we had last Friday, which we had hoped pulled a lot of this stuff together, as of that meeting, we basically took a step backward and took a pause. And what we agreed to do is some people, as Jeff reported, and it's in Jim Markman's memo, which is fine, some of the ag folks agreed to get together and talk a little bit about how we might look at pumping going forward. Without understanding how that pumping might occur going forward, realistically, not conceptually, but realistically how that pumping might be going forward and where we might pump from and who's really going to be pumping under different scenarios, it's very hard for us to model something that's practical. So we need that to go forward. So that's going to be done. Once we get that information, there have been some scenarios put out that are what I would call, in my mind, because we tried to put it out there that way, reasonably aggressive, but also reasonable to keep people operating for a certain amount of time while we ram things down and get into control. It would involve some period of overdraft continued. So we've put some thoughts out there what that might look like. So if we we're talking about pulling the ag people together and getting them together on the same page about where the pumping might occur going forward on a plan like this, and then get the particulars of a plan. We're planning on scheduling an modeling ad hoc group call because we want we're still working on the technical side. We want the ad hoc group involved in the decision we make for this next modeling run. So we are looking at, is Jeff's going to get a notice out. We're looking at probably trying to have an ad hoc call no later than Tuesday of next week. We're hoping to hear from the folks in their meetings between today, tomorrow, and Monday. Having an ad hoc call next week to get it settled and understand where we're going to go with our very next model run. And then there's an attorney group scheduled for the fall next Thursday. So hopefully we'll be able to come back to the attorneys group and tell them what we plan to run. Hopefully we'll get some concurrence because we're going to bring what we're doing is we're bringing the technical approach, presumably, into the allocation folks and showing them how it fits together and how this is going to look when it comes out the other side after we model it on impacts. So if we can do that, it's very likely that after Thursday, we will be back on track again and be looking at getting a DRI going on our third model run. If that doesn't work out, then frankly, literally, there is a closed session scheduled for the board the following week, the following Thursday. It's an hour-and-a-half closed session. Closed session is going to start at 9:30. Board meeting's not going to start till 11. Frankly, if we don't pull this together for that attorneys group, the technical and the attorneys group, we're going to be going into closed session, and I'm going to be asking, Jim Markman's going to be asking for direction on the board where we go. Because right now we're not sure where to go with our technical work. It's great to work with the technical. We've been doing that, but where we've gotten directed now through the attorneys group, it doesn't do us any good to go any farther, not with the tech, but any farther in our modeling group without getting more concurrence on where we need to be once we put the next model run together. So that's a lot. I made some notes just now. I didn't have any presentation, but I want to let you folks know where we're at and where we're going because it is a bit frustrating for us. We want to do this. We want to do it right, and we want to hear from everybody, and we're hearing from a lot of different sides. That's not unusual. It is complicated, but I want to let everybody know where we're going. And if we don't have something pulled together, you will know by the board meeting a week from Thursday. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you,
Adam. I have something to say.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve, for laying the situation on the line. Yeah. I think I can speak for this committee in the sense that we also are very much feeling the frustration and the concern for the schedule because we're part of your team too, and I'm sure that the PAC also is. I'm speaking out of turn here, but I'll say it anyway. I think they are also feeling the same kind of frustration and pressure, and we certainly all appreciate the difficulties that lead to it. But the reality is the reality. That's the hard message.
That's where we are. Okay. I think we're ready for Gene.
I have one quick question. That's one critical piece, but there's other pieces of the GSP that can still continue to move forward.
There are, Eddie, you're absolutely right.
Right.
But as you mentioned earlier, things like thresholds and things like that. I mean, literally, we have had numerous conversations, Jeff and I, numerous conversations as to, depending on where we go on this next step, the reality we're talking about makes a huge difference on our thresholds. Huge.
So let me build on that, and Don touched on this too, is let's get a network established that maybe would help guide some of those discussions.
You're absolutely right. We're going to talk about some of that here today, too. Yeah. Agreed, yes.
And then one more other question. On imported water, it sounds like you're supportive of imported water.
Absolutely. Not 100%, 1,000%. Right. I think this community needs it extremely bad. Yes.
So how do we from a technical perspective, not the bureaucratic political perspective, how do we make sure that message is definitely getting to the GA? Why would somebody want not to look at imported water when that would limit growth in the area too?
Honestly, and I don't think there's anybody that doesn't want to look at it. I think for a period of time before the board at the last meeting authorized the hiring of the Capital Group and Tatum Group, before they were hired, I think there was some skepticism and maybe some board members that were hesitant to spend that money. I know people. I know Don Zadiba talked to some people, talked to some board members. There were some offline discussions about it, and I think it was unanimous at the board to hire Capital Corps at Tatum. So I don't think there's anybody on the board that's against going through this process. I'll be honest with you. There's some board members who believe that believe that generally speaking, we need to do this, even if it is, not saying it is, but even if it is just to show that it's not feasible. Either way, we need to do it.
Do you think they understand that even if large ag went away tomorrow, you're still short 4,000 acre feet?
100%.
Yeah.
100. We've been preaching that this community won't be the same without imported water, regardless of ag. I mean, that's on the table.
Maybe we need to take a bigger hammer to the meetings. Maybe.
Well, we started out with a concept of quite a bit of imported water. We sort of backed our expectations down a little bit. Anything that anybody can do to help facilitate coordination, primarily with people like LADWP. I don't think State Water Project is a big hurdle to get access to rights there. We know people. I know places where we can get water that way. It won't be cheap, but I know we can do that. LADWP is going to be a tough nut to crack, and without LADWP on a sharing, a 2-for-1, or one for whatever we end up doing, if we don't crack LADWP, we're looking at AVAC, and that's very, very expensive water because that's a lot of new facilities. So anybody who has any help they can provide to our group, we're certainly appreciative of that to crack some of those nuts going forward. But we are moving forward with Capital Corps and with the Tatum Group. We've already had one internal discussion. We are scheduling our first kickoff meeting with the committee, the smaller committee that hired them, it's a kickoff for a workshop on what we're going to do next, what their tasks are for the next 2 or 3 months to bring things back. They'll be bringing reports. I can tell you, sitting down with them, they're going to hit the ground running in two areas. One looking for water, the other one looking for funding for both of them. So they're going to hit the ground going. So I think we've got the right people working on this. I'm optimistic that we're going to find imported water. We're going to get imported water. How long it takes, I'm not sure. I'm optimistic, but we definitely need to keep that moving. Yes.
What do you think their deliverable is going to be? Ultimately, it's going to be a sort of opinion paper.
If I might jump in just really quick to remind everybody, we do need to stick with what's on our agenda, and this is the TAC committee.
Yeah.
So.
But it impacts the GSP schedule. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. I'll just answer that question, but you're right. We should move on. I'm not sure what the deliverable will look like when we're all done. I have some ideas, some thoughts. Whatever we produce as a deliverable with the Capital Corps Group, I anticipate we will have some meat on the bone to put in the GSP because I think DWR needs that. I'm hoping that we'll have at least a memorandum of understanding, some principles, a first right of refusal agreement with somebody with a State Water Project state land entitlement, that we've got a first right of refusal of a purchase of those water rights as they become available, because I know of some agencies that have different circumstances, maybe putting some stuff up available, maybe have that pulled together to go in the GSP, and possibly have some principles of an understanding on how we might trade or transfer and exchange water with LADWP. That's if we have that much as some substance to go in the GSP, I would be very, very excited, because those would be huge steps in the amount of time we have. Okay.
So if I could just add, Steve, you mentioned LADWP a few times in the last few sentences, and it seems like the follow-up with them on their interest in the recharge project is the place to go with that. And I know we expected to hear something earlier in the year from them, and we haven't. So I don't know how much hounding you've done of them, but that seems like a reasonable place to start.
Yeah, you're right, and I know Don's gone. I know Don has been checking on them, and also Jeff, and you were at the meeting too, so everybody was there.
Yeah, and the feeling that I think we got coming out of that meeting was optimistic.
Yes.
Although knowing LADWP, that's caveated, but that we felt like we were going to hear something more substantial by now. So I don't know what's going on, but it seems like that's a reasonable place to start.
I agree with you, Tim, and I'll just give you the benefit of my thoughts on that too, because we've been thinking about that also. With the group, we were able to get on board, Capital Corps and Tatum, and you heard the presentations. They have some past some relationships with LADWP in the management level above where we are right now. So the folks we're at are sort of the staffing and the working level, and they're taking it to the management. They have some connections at the management level. So my thinking on it is getting Capital Corps and Tatum on board as soon as we can, and have them start talking to the management on the top side. So we're going from both directions. That's kind of what I was thinking. Is hopefully they know enough people on the management level that they can meet with, start talking to them. We've already told them about where we're at, and bring it together. So yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Gene. Gene, are you with us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We probably bored you to death.
We can't hear you, Gene.
I'm unmuted.
There you are.
There you are.
Okay. There seems to be a delay also on the live feed coming back, so I can't look at the live feed to be able to do this presentation. It seems to have a 30-second delay. So is the first slide up?
First slide is up.
Okay. So in this presentation, I wanted to review the shallow well impact analysis and to fill in the numbers that I did not have at the last TAC meeting. The last TAC meeting, we only covered the baseline and the future modeling scenarios for shallow well impact. And in this presentation, it's a summary of what we discussed with shallow well impacts historically, and then how those get projected through the future. Where we need to start is how many shallow wells are there. There is not a full inventory of somebody GPSing in every well, but in 2014, Todd engineers did spend a lot of time looking both aerial photos and field surveying where rural domestic residences were. And we are basing our number of shallow wells on that inventory. So their estimate was that there were 1,588 residences, so basically 1,500 residences. Of those, some are connected as municipal wells to municipal well systems, and others are connected to the community service district wells of Inyokern. So how we developed the amount of wells and where they were was based on Todd engineers and also the well permit locations from Kern County Health Department. Of those, we had 377 private or domestic wells. With the municipal wells, the hookups, the 491 hookups from the municipal wells and the 265 hookups for the CSD wells, the remaining wells that we didn't know about were the 455 wells to get to the total of 872 shallow wells.
Gene,
if we go to the next slide.
Gene?
Yes?
I think you are calling municipal rather than mutual.
you're right. Those should say mutual wells on the last line. Thank you. That's why yes, thank you. The next page. So this is a map showing the 377 permitted wells as the light blue small dot, and then the other private well distribution that is the darker blue small dot. The other shallow wells that we are looking at are the mutual and CSB wells, and they are the yellow dots. So you can see the general distribution. The other larger dots on this map are the 66 larger production wells. So our estimated wells in the basin are 938 production wells. The next slide. Once we knew where the wells were, we needed to estimate the rate of drawdown in any area of the basin. How this was developed was by digitizing in KCWA's groundwater level contour maps using GIS for 2010 and 2015, and developing raster files and calculating with the two surfaces, calculating the difference in those surfaces to develop an average annual rate of drawdown by section, which would be 1 square mile. For the future baseline runs, we use the model results by model cell to develop an average drawdown rate for each section. For the future runs, we picked a number of years, which would be the 2020 when the future runs start, or the management starts, 2025, 2030, 2040, and 2070. These different years were picked for different milestones within the GSP, or when different management would occur within the basin to try to capture the changing rate of drawdown. The next slide. We are lacking data on the well construction within the basin of how each well is constructed. So we are making some assumptions on how each well is constructed where we don't know the information. We had a little bit more data with the 377 permitted wells. There were 116, it was either 112 or 116 of the wells had both a total depth when the well was drilled and a static water level, which gave us a general understanding of the water column that was being established as the well was drilled. So typically a driller will drill to the water table and then drill another number of feet below the water table to accommodate a silt sump at the bottom, a 40-foot screen or some interval of screen. Then above the screen would be a pump column where for the pump to operate within, and then also some surface where the pump, when the pump is on, that the lowered water table would be accommodated within the pump column, within the well. There's a schematic to the right that shows what the assumptions are in this analysis. Basically, we are counting on 70 feet being required of a water column to accommodate a healthy well. And then all the water column above that 70 feet would be where a drawdown in the surrounding aquifer could occur and the well could still function. The median permitted wells, the depth of that static water level to total depth where there were measurements was 118 feet. So we use that distance as the water column for all wells that we didn't know the water column for. So that would be the remainder of the 377 permitted wells and the other 455 private wells that we had no information on. The estimated number of years before a well would be impacted would be the usable water column, which is above the pumping water level, or above the current static water level in the well, and the water level at the time that the well was drilled. And then that gets divided by the rate of drawdown per year, and that would give us the number of years left of the well to be able to operate. So there's quite a few assumptions in the shallow well impact analysis, but it at least gives us a sense of how many wells could be impacted each year for the different management scenarios for this basin. Going to the next slide. These were the results of the historical rate of drawdown between 2010 and 2015. This is per year, and you can see that it ranges from no loss of groundwater and storage. So even in the El Paso, there were some wells that had water level rises in that time period, or zero change. Then the greens are from 0 until 1 foot per year of drawdown. Where it's yellow and orange, it's 1 to 2 feet of drawdown. And in one of the areas, it was even between 2.5 and 3 feet of drawdown. Going to the next slide. This is the historical impact to shallow wells from this analysis. So prior to 2019, this method estimates that 91 wells went dry between the middle of the 1980s until 2019. The cumulative impact, which is the gold line on the graph, shows that this methodology estimates that 14 went dry by the year of 2000 at the turn of the century. 56 went dry cumulatively by 2010, and 91 went dry by 2019. You can see that early on there aren't that many wells that went dry, and that it increased through time. The average, just looking at the graph, is probably about 5 wells a year, 2 to 5 wells a year in the recent past. And that seems to agree with anecdotal estimates, some that Don provided, but also other people have come forward to say that their well went dry. So this does seem to be in agreement with what has generally been happening within the basin. Going to the next slide, what's nice on the handouts is you get the top picture is the color gradient map, and the bottom is the graph. But we only can go through one slide at a time on the screen. So the baseline is a 50-year predicted drawdown is shown in this map. So this is all 50 years. This is not the same as the last map, which was an annual estimate. As was stated earlier by Jeff, this has a lot more pumping than we think is currently happening. This average for 50 years is what was estimated and put into the model. The number that Jeff showed you was what the model calculated. So that's the difference in those numbers. They're pretty close. I think his was 36,800 something, and this was a little bit more. But this is what we asked the model to pump. And I broke it down by the different pumping groups for the basin. But that just it gives you an estimate. It's always good to have that number of what this represents. So this is close to 37,000 acre-feet per year of pumping for 50 years. The next slide. So this is a new slide. We didn't have this last time. These are the predicted number of wells that will be impacted. The addition in the algorithm for calculating this is that wells would either be deepened or replaced. And we spoke to a driller who works in the basin, and he says that currently, when they deepen a well, they go another 100 feet. So what that causes is that drop-off, you see after about 2050, those wells are a lot deeper than our historical estimates of how deep wells are. And it makes sense that if a basin has groundwater levels declining, that new wells would go a lot deeper to accommodate that declining groundwater level. So as wells got re-drilled, the algorithm states either to go another 100 feet deeper from where the current well is. So it gives it another 100 feet of usable water column. There's two different colors on the graph. One is the permitted wells that we know the total depth of, and then the other, the darker blue, is where we don't have as much certainty on what that initial well was. The cumulative is the gold line, and the basic statistics are that by 2030, 81 wells would be impacted under these baseline 37,000 acre-feet of pumping a year. And then by 2040, when the basin is supposed to be sustainable, it was 231 wells were impacted, and by 2050, 633 wells were impacted.
Gene, if I may ask, Gene?
Yes.
Just wanting to verify your assumption that these wells, if they receive either a redrilling or even if it's a new well by 100 feet, in the baseline of no action, they're still being hit. Too many of them are still being reduced to no flow.
Correct. Within this, we have... So
within this scenario.
We're looking at 872 shallow wells. And the reason we can go to even more, we still end up with 872 wells at the end. So a well comes back into commission with another 100 feet of water column whenever it goes dry. I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that this graph is already including the assumption that each of the wells that will go dry have been extended by 100 feet so that they will be, in essence, protected with the additional time with pumpage happening and the water levels going down.
So how the algorithm works is each year it looks to see how much more water column it has. If it goes dry, then it counts.
Okay.
And then the next year, it goes another 100 feet deeper and is back into play. So I doubt that any well hit a full 100 feet of drawdown. I think the max was 70 feet. But anyway, technically, yes, if a well had enough drawdown near it, it could have to be re-drilled twice or deepened twice, probably deepened and then re-drilled.
Okay.
But yes, this has the assumption of each time a well goes dry, within the next year, it has another, it's re-drilled or deepened.
Gene, on the graph that you're showing right now, the number of shallow wells impacted, that's impacted per year. The label of your vertical axis on the left side.
Okay, yes, it should say per year.
Yes, it should.
That is not total. Thank you. Next slide. This is scenario 1. And to remind everybody what the assumptions are for it, the pumping ramp down occurred over 20 years. There was imported water for recharge and recovery in the El Paso Basin. What you can see is that big drawdown of red in the El Paso Basin. That's the imported recharge and recovery project. Recycled water use was used in this scenario, and the management concepts that were investigated were cliff pumping and leasing. So as you can see, the part of this leasing plan was that some of the ag pumping was leased to pumping that occurred in the southeast area. So the northwest area is blue, with showing no drawdown or rising water levels over the 50-year period. And the southeast area is a little somewhere between a blue and a green. So it has 0 to 10 feet of drawdown occurring over the 50 years. The next slide. So this is where the y-axis on the left side should say per year, similar to the last one. But as you can see, by this scenario, by getting the pumping to 7650, equal to the simulated recharge, there are a lot fewer wells, shallow wells, that get impacted due to lowering of groundwater levels. So prior to 2040, the sustainability, the year to bring the basin into sustainability, 32 wells or shallow wells would be impacted. And 20 wells get impacted by 2025, and then you can see on the graph that by 2030, we've already reached the 32 wells, and no more wells get impacted because water levels are no longer declining. The next slide. With scenario 2, the 50-year predicted drawdown shows up a little bit differently than than scenario 1. With this scenario, we reduce pumping by 38% in 2025 and by 54% in 2030. And where there is, as in scenario 1, the ag pumping water was leased, those rights were leased, and the pumping was occurring more in the southeast. This one is the opposite. There is less pumping because of direct use of imported water for the Water District and Searles Valley Minerals in the southeast and southwest. So that area now is not seeing any drawdowns. Whereas, given there will be some ag pumping, there is some drawdown in the northwest from 10 to 20 feet. So it's a different distribution of pumping within the basin. So the wells on the next slide, are different wells, even though they're a similar count. They're different wells than the one for scenario 1. And this is also fairly similar. The number for scenario 1 was 32, and the number for scenario 2, that should say 2 on that slide, and it also should say per year, is 33 wells total. These all have the same assumption that it's 100 feet of deepening within the well. The next slide. What needs to be done is to basically collect real data for the shallow wells. There are wells that get re-drilled and deepened, and the person who owns the well does not even know that it's due to a lowering groundwater table. They may just know that the well has gone, that the well is no longer working, and then the driller comes in or a pump guy comes in and they fix the well. So the information that needs to be collected is to confirm the location for all of the mutual and rural domestic wells within the basin. Also to canvass all available resources for well logs. We have very limited knowledge of the actual wells, the logs and construction data of these shallow wells. And then to develop a comprehensive database of well construction data, history of well deepening and or replacement. Not that we will be able to get all the data, but the more information we get on the history of if a well, when a well was rehabilitated, if it was deepened because of water levels or because of a pump failure, because it was drawing in too much air, that needs to be teased out of the data so that we can verify these assumptions that we put into this shallow well analysis. And that's it.
Thank you, Jean. All right. To the committee, comments or questions for her?
Yeah, just a quick comment. The GeoGIS system, it has the well construction information in it for the well logs that we collected, which was over 1,100. So that's a start.
Okay.
And I'm thinking in the next month or two, we should be able to get that over to you. We've just been doing some QA/QC on it. And it'll be wrapped into the HCM, the Hydrogeologic Conceptual Model Report, as an appendix. So
hopefully as a CD to the appendix. That's pretty huge.
No, I think, we can talk to you about that, but it may be, maybe the simplest is just to turn it over as an access database to you.
Right. That would be great.
Gene, on your baseline showing the well failure rate before 2020, you commented that the average was maybe 5. What we've been seeing is somewhat more than that, but your number is in the ballpark. We're seeing, and this may be on the low side because we haven't observed all the well drilling activity, but the number we see is more, especially recently, is more like 7 or 8. It's not greatly different, but it is higher. The other thing that is related to my comment, your model has what I think is kind of a strange behavior in the, if you look, for example, on scenario 1, your bar chart plot. Yeah. The very first, that's 2021 and 2022, I assume, the numbers, right. The bars are pretty small, and then it jumps up. I think those first 2 bars are somehow being biased into a small number. They should be more like, at least 5, 7. It won't make a lot of difference, but there's something funny, I think, about how the model is working. You might look at that and make sure there isn't a systematic bias. I'm not commenting so much about those 2 years, but just the fact that they exist means that perhaps there are some overlooked or something peculiar about how the model is working. I think overall it's a really good effort, however. I'm not making this a very critical comment, just an observation.
Right. Even the well drill date had to be assumed, and I tried to do it using a random number generator to work on it being distributed. We knew where the wells were roughly, given Todd's work, but we didn't know when the well was drilled. And it might be something like that has skewed that piece. Well, I can check that.
Yeah, that's possible.
Because one thing it happens again. Yes?
Well, one thing that you could do is, even though the county may not have the well permit data on file, they should have the building permits for the rural properties, and the well drilling and the construction is going to be more or less concurrent, typically.
Oh, okay. We didn't check that.
Right. It's a possibility to.
That makes sense.
Yeah, look at that.
Thank you.
Hey, Gene, this is Eddie. A couple of questions or comments. So do you envision going back to the addition of the future recommended work? That's a bit of effort to do that. And again, the clock's ticking, tick, tick, tick. GSPs do.
Oh, this won't be done. It's future, right? It's not before the GSP.
Okay. All right. So you envision maybe.
I don't see us getting it before.
Okay, because that's going to have an impact on how the basin's managed, right? Based on that data that gets fed in at some point. And I'll bring up it's sort of an example. So if you go to like the 2010-2015 slide, where you have your historical rates of drawdown, I think it's
correct.
The next one, I think it's the historical rate of drawdown slide. I don't know. Can you? We're not looking at it yet. Keep going back. Keep going back. Right there. Okay. So section 17. Okay, you're seeing 3 feet of drawdown a year. That's sort of estimated. It's a bit of a loaded question, but let's say large ag's not responsible for that rate of drawdown. So if the GAs, on their mission, are looking at options, what's causing that? What's causing that 2.5 to 3 feet of drawdown in section 17? What pumping's causing that? Do you know?
So these contours are from KCWA.
Right.
And so these are based on measured groundwater levels and the changes that occur right there.
Sure.
I can check the actual data that she used, that Michelle used to contour those. And that is an average for that whole section. So obviously, some of it's even greater than 3 feet.
Right.
But something is causing that cone of depression. And is it a water level that was contoured in that was a pumping water level? I haven't checked that.
Sure.
I can go back to the 2015 and 2010 data and just compare what the measured results were and see if I can see something that would, because obviously it's a bullseye. So it's like, wow, why is that there?
Right.
So I will check those water levels that were measured.
Sure, I have a sneaky suspicion why, but regardless, I guess my point is that goes back to highlight the importance of collecting, data and then utilizing that data to help manage, the basin. So I think this is a great start.
Right. I
think
think the measured data is better than the simulated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm.
Gene, this is Earl.
Yes.
The data that was acquired in those areas, is that twice a year, the water year?
Yes, and what we use the spring water levels for both those years, but we use the spring contours. We did not use the actual data. And the contours, how Michelle described the contouring of the groundwater level data is that each time she does it, she builds it upon the previous groundwater level contour. So she posts the data on those, the previous year's groundwater levels, and then she moves the lines of the contours to make sure that it's true to the new data. So they're not redrawn each time. They're just looked at where is the change and adjusting those surface lines or those contours to develop this. And that's basically what we use.
So you're using a model of a previous model that may have some flaws in it.
We are using measured data has been used to contour the groundwater level so that it's actually a surface.
Yeah,
and
but
the reason it's actually a good way, I like this way. Now we can all question whether the initial groundwater level contour was the right shape or not. It does from year to year just adjust for the change in localized areas and not change areas where it was interpreted but there's no measured data to say, oh, redraw this.
Okay, I understand that. But you're just looking at a short time period and the change over that period in multiple years, multiple iterations.
Correct. No, one iteration for each. So the groundwater level measurements were collected for that spring and posted on the last year's contours, and the contours were adjusted to make sure that they correctly represented the new year, and then that becomes the new year's contour map. So these were based on measured data, both the 2010 and 2015 contours.
Okay.
It's
So
just a drawdown difference.
It's not on a
then.
yearly frequency then?
No, I purposely didn't do 1 year. I did 5 years so I'd get an average.
Okay, I see
And
what
then
you're
these
doing.
numbers that I put in the legend, those are per year. So that difference divided by 5 is what those numbers are.
Okay, I see what you're doing. Okay, that's enough for me.
And then this could be reproduced as we move forward, this historical for the rates of drawdown. But hopefully we would get real data, and I'm not sure if it would be regulatory, if with permits for drilling, that there would be a questionnaire asking, what the water levels were, or why the well was being deepened, or why there was a pump failure, why a driller was called out, or a pump person was called out to a well. If there was some way to get that kind of information to actually record when a well has been impacted.
Were there any
That needs
anomalies?
to be looked at.
Were there any anomalies in the wells that you looked at in that general area?
I didn't go well by well. I handled all 872 together.
No, do you see what I'm talking about? Were there a lot of wells being deepened in that area?
I have not plotted where each well is that goes dry or is impacted. I have not plotted that.
I think that would be something that'd be interesting.
The changes and where which wells get drilled over time.
Right.
So basically a movie of wells popping on, being lit up, and then moving through time as it paces through.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, it would be interesting.
This is Don. The section that we're looking at, there actually aren't that many wells in that section. And the principal reason for that high rate of drawdown has to do with a single well. I think you'll discover that.
Okay.
We would need to see the wells and the amount of pumping that's being used. This is Adam, and I do have another question as well, because it does say 2010 to 2015, and I just wanted to verify this is not just the drawdown difference between those two time frames. This actually represents the year-to-year amount, because it's a bit confusing when it just says 2010 to 2015 as a drawdown difference set.
So we used 2010 and 2015 groundwater elevation contours. And we made surfaces of those two, and then by every single section, in using GIS, we looked at the elevation, average elevation change in each section.
Yes.
Then we divided that by 5 to get the rate of feet per year.
Okay, and then took that over each 5-year set, the average, and that's what is being used in the change amount.
Correct.
Okay. But this here does not indicate individual wells. It just indicates over the entire section what the average amount is.
Correct.
Okay.
But that's what was applied to each well, the average per section. We did not look at one lap long. Any well within a section, all wells within one section get the same rate of drawdown.
Okay. That was the average place then. Okay. Thank you.
Gene, I have one last comment. This is Don again. This is partly following up on what Eddie was talking about of the importance, emphasizing again the importance of getting additional construction and water level data in the shallower wells. The domestic well owners' representatives on the PAC have prepared and has been submitted through the PAC to the board a voluntary registration plan. The matter of going forward here is in the hands of the board, in other words.
Correct. We are not tasked to do these future recommendations at this time, and I am hoping that yes, that there will be some responses, a significant amount of responses from the domestic well owners to register their well, because then we would have that data.
Surely, but the first task to be accomplished is the contact that was strongly recommended in that letter to the board. And the board needs to basically decide what they want to do about it and proceed. Many of the rural domestic well owners are basically ignorant of what's going on, and they might well be willing to register, but they simply don't know because they've not been reading the newspapers and so on.
Did you want to say what you just said, Steve?
Well, sure. I said as part of my job, we need to get it on the agenda for the board meeting in 2 weeks. That needs to be on the agenda because this is really important, and we need to get it on the agenda. I don't think it is right now, but we need to get it on the agenda. I'm making a note of it.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the committee?
I have one thing before we go to public.
Okay.
Is it okay to do that? Right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I don't want to bore you guys with this, but it's important that I get these messages across because we're trying to be as transparent as we can. This is follow-up and a continuation of what I talked about before, and Don Decker mentioned it's good to have a reality check. I want to just mention, because Gene just presented this, first of all, I want to make sure that the folks that are here who have clients, from Mojave and Meadowbrook and stuff, make sure that this information is passed on to your technical folks, because I know Anthony's not here, Wade's not here. We have technical people. Make sure you look, but they've been asking for this. They know that Gene was going to present this. They've been asking for this information. So make sure, in order for us to do what we're trying to do going forward, I need to make sure your folks have it. If you need us to send it to you, we'll send it to you, because they knew it was going to be presented today. The second part of that is and this is more for the TAC and the audience. I mentioned the concept to you a few minutes ago about trying to maintain the amount of water this basin has called in reserve going forward. And I told you that we're getting a strong push in that direction and not say what we're going to do, but there's a strong push in that direction about trying to maintain that reserve. This shallow well impacted study, this is the best information we have right now. We obviously are going to have some good information, maybe from Tim and maybe from the shallow well folks, but the bottom line is we're probably not going to get a whole lot more good technical information on shallow wells going forward to do our evaluation on impacts in the short term. So this is what we have. And the important thing to note about this is when we're looking at impacts, both past, which the number's gone up from the number I saw before about the ones prior to 2019 or 2020, the past shallow well impacts and the projected going forward, primarily if you look at the baseline study, that's worst case scenario, understand that. But looking at that, you can see there's a lot of shallow well impacts. Past, some have been addressed, but past shallow well impacts and going forward. There's a lot of shallow well impacts. There's no question that, and it's the next topic on the agenda, that there's an opportunity to develop a mitigation plan, to develop funding for it and do mitigation and do all that going forward. There's no question we're on that too. So I'll make sure you know that. But there is an issue related to past shallow well impacts and shallow well impacts going forward, and the amount of water in reserve, and what is it going to cost, and who's going to pay for all the mitigation costs for domestic impact from the wells that are going to be impacted. Who's going to pay for all of this in relation to the alternative being whatever means is necessary, get your production down lower so that you reduce those impacts, okay? Whatever means is necessary, reduce those impacts so that one, you do two things. One, you reduce the mitigation cost, and two, you keep the water in, you keep that water in reserve. So those are the things that are being put in front of us that we've got to figure out. It's just a follow-up to my discussion earlier about what we have in front of us that we're going to try and get pulled together over before the next board meeting, which is 2 weeks from today, I believe. So I just want to let everybody know how important this impact analysis is.
I have a quick question. Going back to the previous slide on the 2010, 2015, the section that was red, I mean, no matter what large ag does, that red's not going to get fixed with large ag.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Understand. And part of
I
the
just hope that message is getting pushed back to the board, saying there's certainly so much that we can do.
Yeah. So. I appreciate it, Eddie. Yeah. So that's what I want to say, and I'm done.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and turn over to the public.
Thanks, Adam. Derek Hoffman. Hi, Gene. I don't know.
Hi, Derek.
Good to see you, Gene, or good to hear you, Gene. I don't know if you can see me. There's about 20 people in the audience. Most are PAC members, and so we're all familiar faces here. Just going to, I think it's slide 5, Gene, the same slide that Eddie Teasdale was just referring to with the question mark over section 17. And then the slide after that, number 6, where, if you could, thank you, estimated historical impact to shallow wells. I apologize if you've already said this today and I missed it, but my question is, do you know where in the basin those 91 numbered wells are located?
Yes. But I mean, I can't tell you where, but I can't tell you verbally right now, but yes, in the algorithm, what each of those wells is, there's a lat long of it.
Is
an
that,
estimated lat long of it.
Is that something that could be plotted?
Yes, it could be plotted.
Because the reason I ask is I was asking for this the last 2 or 3 meetings, I believe, and saying, Meadowbrook and other agricultural interests and other pumpers have all long said that we're concerned about the shallow wells and we think there ought to be a plan to mitigate impacts to the shallow wells. And I'm not trying to repeat what's been said again today, but in order to mitigate, we need to know where they're located. And if you have that information, I think it would be very helpful to this group and the board and others to see where those 91 wells are located. Plotted, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, please.
I'd like to give a word of caution to that, however. We are estimating the depth, and with that, this estimates, it does place wells. Each of those little blue dots is a well that we estimate is located right there. And then based on the drawdown rates, this is how many get impacted. As far as ground truthing, is that the actual well? Obviously I do not have real data on it, but yes, we can plot where the well impacts are based on all of these assumptions, like well construction and when the date of the well was drilled.
Thank you, Jean. Okay.
Judy Decker. Hi, Jean. This is just a comment. Your graphs showing wells that have been deepened or will be deepened over time. Somewhere it needs to be taken into account the water quality, especially on Brown Road, in certain areas, going deep will be a disaster. People will hit extremely non-potable water. But there are other areas of the valley where going deep is going to also hit non-potable water for the private well owner. And somehow this has to be factored in. I know you did a TDS model run, I think you did, but it needs to be considered also in other areas besides just a model run. And I wanted to point that out because it's often overlooked. Thank you.
If I might help on that, Adam. Thank you, Judy. Our thought, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, on this, but right now under our scope of work and budget and Prop 1 funding that we have one more transport model run for water quality. Our intent was to hold that one back until we have a plan that we think we've got relatively good buy-in. That's what I was talking about what we're trying to do over the next week or two. Relatively good buy-in, run the model that we think everybody likes, and obviously run shallow well impacts with that model run, which would include water quality. So we want to put it together with something that we're going to use rather than just hypothetical right now. So we're saving that run, but yes, we will.
Thank you. All right, any other public comments? Okay, we'll move back to the committee group here. Any other comments? All right, we will move on to the next portion.
Next item, Adam, is actually hopefully very brief. At the last TAC meeting, we provided just an outline, sort of a first draft outline that is intended to be included and expanded for the GSP. It relates directly to the shallow well impacts, and basically we called it, here's the name of it, we called it a preliminary impact shallow wells mitigation plan and funding plan approach. So the idea was, and actually I think the title had identification too, was an outline of how we're going to go about the next step. Right now, we're not going to have much more information on shallow well impacts and shallow wells, other than we're going to get some from Don, and I think Tim's going to provide it. But the amount of time we have to really put that information into play, like she's done so far with the information we've got with the modeling and the impacts analysis, probably not a whole lot more we're going to be able to do for the GSP. But we wanted to put together an outline of how we intend to approach the shallow well identification and impacts, mitigation and funding going forward once the GSP is approved by DWR. In other words, that's a work effort that's going to be going on as we go forward. We're not going to be able to complete that while we're doing the GSP. There's just too much to be done, and it's not part of the scope of work. We provided that
there will be comments of that within the GSP.
Yes, we provided this at the last meeting. We've asked for comments. We haven't gotten any. I know it was really written well. This is the one where I told you I wrote it, and then Heather and Jeff pretty much made it bleed with red stuff and revised it and got it good. So this is the one we've provided, and we do want comments. There's no rush on it. We're not putting it in the GSP yet, but we just want to emphasize that you have it. And anybody else looks at it, provide comments to it. If we're missing something, we want more efforts in one area than another, let us know. And we'll make those changes for the GSP.
So how do you envision, going back to the objectives and thresholds, setting objectives now that might change in the future depending on what came out of the shallow well impact analysis?
You know, Eddie, that's a really good question, and I'll answer it two ways. One, we've been having our own discussions, and Jeff might be able to provide input too, on how we're going to set thresholds now. Mm-hmm. We don't know. We don't know for sure. We have a lot of ideas, but depending on how things work out, pulling the plan together is going to focus us in on how we establish thresholds around the plan that we develop. That they're going to come together at the same time. So I don't know right now. And the second part of the question, but we will know fairly soon. By the time we have a plan, we've got to work on thresholds. So yes, it is coming. The second answer to that part of that question, going forward, possible changes. I'm not sure. I would expect that when we do our reviews, our 5-year reviews, depending on what we find, I mean, there's work going to be done after this GSP gets drafted done. I anticipate there's quite a bit more work that needs to be done, more information gathered, more work to be done. And if it's justified to change thresholds, we would do it. We would submit it as part of the updates for the GSP to DWR. So I think that's certainly open. We want to do the best we can the first shot, but I think it's open to make changes as we go forward with information that we pull together.
Yeah. What I think we're going to see is you got to get your objective set, and then you set your threshold, and then you can manage within that, space. So I think that's the key, to set those that in a way that everybody agrees to. And again, getting that network set up and getting those objectives and thresholds out there now, I think is going to be, important. Yeah. I'll probably say it half a dozen more times before the meeting's over.
Good.
Okay. So that was 3A, triple I, and then you're done with the 3A portion. We can move on to B now. The sustainable management criteria.
Yeah. Monitoring network and data gap status report. I think that's Jane.
Yes. There should be a new handout that comes up, or presentation.
I think it's up.
Okay. So there's 3 items on this status update. It's where's my agenda? It's the water quality sampling plan, the stream gauges weather station, and the TSS status update. So the first slide is the sampling and aquifer testing. So for Prop 1 funding, a year and a half ago, is it already? We asked for, and these were recommendations from the cooperative group, we asked for funding for TDS and general chemistry sampling at wells, springs, and streams. And we're looking at doing it in 2 phases. We've been working with KCWA for contacting domestic well owners. And it turns out that they really do not have much contact information for the well owners for the 60 domestic wells that they measure at. So we will be needing to do some mailers to some of these well owners to see if they are willing to participate in and have their wells sampled. 5 domestic well owners have said that they would like to talk to us about the program and see if their well can be sampled. And in addition, we have funding for collecting 10 samples with a sampling rig. So this would be the 3 well volumes or until the parameters are stabilized kind of sample without for wells that do not have a pump in them. And then also to collect some surface water, spring and stream samples. So the phase 1 would be the wells, the homeowners that we can sample from their well, and then the sampling rig and the surface water samples. The map to the right are the wells that we proposed to KCWA for sampling. We wanted to tie these wells into the current monitoring program and look at collecting a baseline general chemistry sampling for these wells and look at having them be sampled periodically into the future. So once we collect the data, we can look at which wells we would recommend for future sampling, for a future water quality sampling program. The phase 2 would be after we reach out to the other domestic wells that are within the KCWA program and then collect those samples. The other piece that we are working on with the Prop 1 funding is isotope sampling. We have subcontracted Jenny at DRI we are in the process of writing the subcontract with Jenny, who is a geochemist, to come up with a work plan for the isotope sampling. And there also is looking and reviewing. We've already developed a map of the aquifer tests that have been done in the past, and looking at where there are gaps in data for aquifer parameters to collect those for updating the model in the future. So that's what is happening with that particular piece of work. The next slide. The stream gauges and weather stations. This is a map I think you received a couple TAC meetings ago. So all of work plan, what you got handed, what was a part of a handout, got slightly reformatted and sent to BLM. And they are, the Ridgecrest BLM staff are working on permitting for the Sand Canyon gauging station, the Indian Wells Canyon gauging station, and the Walker Pass East precip station. Steve Reich has put this together and presented it to you, and we would need to go back to the actual handout that you got to know exactly all the work that's being done on each of those. But I think there are only a few comments back from that work plan, and then he has proceeded forward with it. The Chimney Peak Fire Station, precip station, that permit coordination has been forwarded to the Bakersfield BLM staff, and we are working with them on the data they need to set up a precip station inside that fenced area of Chimney Peak, the fire station. Next slide. The TSS grant application was accepted by DWR on March 21st. I think I sent it out to the Data Gap ad hoc group that had taken place. And we have been working with Jack Tung, who is coordinating with the driller. He needs to be the go-between. We're not really allowed to discuss all the construction and what is needed directly with the driller. So we're working through with Jack to lay things out. And basically, we're asking them to duplicate one of the USBR wells at the sheep herder location that was picked last fall. Ridgecrest BLM staff are also processing the category exclusion for using that piece of property. And that's the update that was happening this last month.
Okay.
This is actually, I think, the first time reported the TSS application was accepted or approved, which is good.
Oh, good. All right, Gene, I do have a quick question for you on the second slide where you state Sand Canyon gauging site, and this is access or permit discussions. Is this needed by the BLM to continue using the gauging site in Sand Canyon?
No. It is being... I have the handout right here to say what was recommended for it. So it's permission to install an in-situ pressure transducer and cellular transmitter, solar panel, and small enclosure.
Okay.
So that it would, so that's what's slotted for that particular gauge.
Okay. So more good items that can be installed there at the gauging site to get more information. Okay. Thank you.
Right. To have it work remotely.
Adam, I have some comments.
Go ahead.
Gene, in your slide that talks to the analysis, the analytical chemistry on well
the
water.
first slide?
Yeah, I didn't track which one it was. It seems to be concentrated on domestic wells, yes. There's no mention of the other wells that obviously are like the Bureau of Reclamation wells.
Correct. Part of what the budget for it was to collect 10 samples at wells that are monitoring wells that we need a sampling rig to go out and actually purge the well and sample it. And then the remainder of the wells we wanted to collect at wells that already had pumps in them. And it is more that if we develop this as a plan in the future, the wells that would be able to collect samples more readily without a sampling rig.
So what you're describing here is approximately half of the total program. There's another 10 wells that are not shown on the map that are the wells that would be sampled sampled with some lesser frequency.
Right. We're looking at, for those 10 samples, to go to existing CASGEM wells.
Sure.
Because we plan on them being some of the primary monitoring wells.
Yes, and some of those wells, like the Bureau of Reclamation wells, do not obviously have pumps in any of the piezometers.
Correct. And right, so right, and we are planning. So a year and a half ago, what we looked at was what we recommended were 10 samples with literally not even knowing where all the wells are. So in hindsight, it would be good to collect all multi-level piezometers, but that is not currently budgeted.
Yeah, that's somewhat unfortunate, but that's the way it is, too.
Right. So it will be prioritizing which wells for this baseline study for the 10 samples. But you're right about that, of the wells. And that's sort of why we concentrated a little more on the domestic wells, because of the pumps in them. We do get gamma data from the deeper wells, the major water suppliers type wells, so the mutuals and some of the larger mutuals and the community service district and the water district. So we do have ongoing TDS samples from them.
Yes, and the Navy, too.
And the Navy, thank you. I knew there was another one in there I was missing.
Hey, Gina Setti, I read somewhere, I don't know who's doing it, they're doing TDS sampling with hydrosleeves, so you don't have to deal with purging. So anyway, it's something we could talk about offline.
Right.
But
Right. We use those a lot at Camp Pendleton successfully. I'm a little concerned with some of the wells because I'm not even sure if they were fully developed when they were drilled, because and 2-inch diameter and 1,000 feet deep is a lot to ask for a hydrosleeve, I think. But we could discuss that.
yeah, just an option.
And we could put some of those down,
Yeah.
and then see and compare them with a purge sample to that might be a good idea to do that with 10 samples and see if they're very comparable. And then in which case a hydrosleeve is a lot less expensive than getting a sampling rig out.
No, I agree.
For future.
Yeah, I agree. Of course, the vendor will tell you it does.
So if we did side by side this time, we could, that might open up a possibility for us. That's a good suggestion for the future sampling events.
Thanks.
Hey, Gene, Tim here. I don't suppose DWR gave you any indication of when they thought that the drill rig might be able to get out into the field.
No, they didn't. But they did say that they weren't sure if they could give us all 2,000 feet. And I was like, well, that's what we want, though. So we'll, yeah. And it's hard not to be in with the driller to know, what can we give up, how can we negotiate, what's the budget range, and not being able to be a part of that. Tim Ross has been gone, and when he gets back, I was thinking it would be good to call him and ask him if we could basically sit with them and the driller and try to figure it out. I think it would be a better use of everybody's time than the multiple emails that go back and forth of one question at a time.
Right. One thing that would be especially valuable would be if the drilling information that's available with BR1 were given to him, to the new driller.
It has been.
Okay.
We put it in with the application. Purposely, because they asked for a nearby well, and that was the perfect well to give them, given its vicinity, and we put it on a map to show them what the distance was to it.
It may be that it's from that data that you got the feedback that they might not be able to get to 2,000 feet because BR1 isn't to 2,000 feet either, for a very good reason.
No, they were concerned with the drill rig itself being able to get there.
Yeah. Well, that's all part of the same package, though.
Yeah, Greg.
Right.
Greg apparently doesn't have quite the capability of their other contractor. We looked at that earlier.
Right. And we also talked to them about, because it's a potential recharge zone, that they do a sonic rig until they get refusal, and then they continue down with reverse rotary, and that's all still on the table.
That'd be great, because we'd get a lot better lithologic information out of that.
Right, but then we'd also get good geophysics if we continued on the other way, so that the hole had mud in it to collect the geophysics with. So yes, they also agreed with that just because of the potential of a recharge project in Freeman Wash.
Different rig might cost more, but
correct. Mobilizing two separate rigs would cost more. But Greg Drilling sent out a Christmas card with a look at our new sonic rig that can go to 1,000 feet. So I sent that on to Jack Tung to use as he was talking to them.
Okay, any other?
We are, part of it is, Tim, is we are the first one that the southern region is proceeding with.
Great.
So part of it is they've not negotiated with the driller before.
That sounds all good, though.
But, yeah, it's good. The questions are coming back very clear. And it will include an aquifer test.
Right on. Okay, any other questions or comments from the committee?
Is this for two holes?
So I told them it could either be clustered or nested.
Okay.
But with it was either 3 or 4 screen intervals.
Right. I was trying to remember where I know we at one point talked about a pumping well and a monitoring well.
Yeah. So part of it is that pumping well may have to be with the CBs.
Okay.
A test well, and we need to make sure it's never called a pumping well, because we cannot get a BLM permit for a pumping well on their land.
It would just be for testing.
And testing.
It would just be for testing,
yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So my bad in terms of the terminology. I meant test well.
I knew what you meant, but just so everybody was very clear that we won't.
We'll give you your whack later, Tim.
That's right.
No,
it's all about
he's the one
terms.
It was good he brought up so we could actually talk a little more about the TSS well, because it'll be a great project.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it'll probably be in the heat of the summer.
Yeah, that'll be good information we get out of that part of the basin.
Yes, it'll be good.
All right. Let's see. That was down to BI number 3, the TSS status update. And I will ask the public if there are any comments or questions. I'll give you this time to come on up. Okay. Gene, I'm assuming, here comes Steve. Steve, item number 3C, you did already mention the implementation options. Do you have any other comments or anything you need to mention?
All done.
Okay. GSP report update.
Yeah, what we have for you in the package is a revised schedule for release of the chapters of the GSP. This is different than what was in the last version of the POAM that was distributed. Today, according to the POAM, as it exists today, all of the modeling was supposed to have been done. All of the discussion of the management actions was supposed to be completed, and today the Technical Advisory Committee was supposed to make a recommendation on what the preferred management actions were. Well, we're not there. So we're not on our schedule on the POAM. The POAM had the groundwater sustainability plan being delivered to the DWR at the end of December. So we had a month of float in that program. It has to be submitted by the end of January of next year. So assuming that we are going to use that month of float and get the plan in at the end of January, this schedule for the release of the chapters reflects a 1 month pushback on the chapters. The next thing that you'll see is we'd already distributed section 1 of the GSP and got comments and have revised that to incorporate the comments and redistributed that. The next section will be the plan area section, which we'll have out in under 2 weeks. And then you'll be seeing the basin setting at around the end of this month. So that's a preview of where we're at. And all the sections after that are assuming that we are able to move forward with the modeling.
Okay.
Just one thing to add, again, for the audience and for the TAC, being as transparent as we can, because I expect somebody to say, you're falling behind. Yes, we are. And have you talked to DWR about the schedule and where you're at? And the answer is no, we haven't. And I want to let you know the reason why we haven't, and we don't think it's appropriate quite yet to talk to them about where we are, where we're going on the schedule, is because we have an invoice and a progress report in front of them right now, waiting for our first reimbursement. We've gone through 2 rounds of reviews with them. It's all been submitted earlier this week, so they have everything. It's in their hands now. They've indicated somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks we should get our first reimbursement. What I don't want to, just so everybody knows, what we don't want to do is disturb that process by suggesting that we might not be on schedule right now. I think once we get our first reimbursement and our first payback on the Prop 1 funding, we'll start talking to them about more where we are, the schedule, and whether or not, we might push back that January date, depending on where we are with Jeff's schedule, our modeling, and getting this GSP done. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Eddie. Just a quick question on Section 5. This is the SMC stuff, which includes a network and undesirable results. I guess I have a request. Could we, maybe it's an ad hoc type group, I don't know, but let's get a figure made that has the proposed network on it displayed, and then we could even identify the wells that we were going to use, and then just have hydrographs for each one of those wells, and then some preliminary objectives and a threshold would be draft, but then again, it just gets the discussion going. And if we could get that before the May meeting, then we could have some, maybe a more detailed discussion on do we have the right wells? Do we not have the right wells? Is that something we could request for May or even before then, or what do you?
That's actually something I had been anticipating we would talk about in May. So I think that's right in line. We've shown some of the hydrographs from some of the previous model we've done and put up just to start thinking about the concepts where the thresholds might be and the objectives might be. But we haven't, as of yet, come back to exactly what network do we want to use for our objectives. And I think, May we can have a good discussion of that.
So what's the action item? To develop a map and hydrographs and identify some objectives and thresholds by the May?
We'll certainly come up with some recommended wells and the hydrographs to go with the wells.
Okay.
And then we'll put some criteria on it to stimulate the discussion.
Right.
I don't know if it'll be what we recommend or what we see, but to
I think just having it displayed, and then folks would kind of get a sense of how how things look.
Or just possible ranges or something for you guys to look at. Right. And come back. Yeah.
And you think we could get that before the TAC meeting? And it can be draft, just so we have some to look at. Yeah. Great, thank you.
Generate some intellectual juices.
We could put together the map with the hydrographs and send that out to the model ad hoc. I think that would be beneficial.
That's perfect,
because that would also, because we are going to run another model run this month, I hope. And when we do, it would be good to have multiple these wells on the hydrograph, and with the model ad hoc, additional wells could be picked so that the model results are actually tying closer in with the measurable objectives and which wells we're going to use for those. So, Eddie, I can send that out to, I can have someone put that together and send that out to the model ad hoc.
Early next week would benefit others as well, but okay, thanks.
I just had a question on the schedule and the basin setting, and then the brackish water project and the HCM coming out of that. Have you guys given any thought into how those how you're going to look at the HCM coming from the brackish water project yet? I know we just released a draft for review not that long ago, and we also need to kind of talk about TAC input to that at some point.
I don't know, Jeff, you want to comment about your thoughts?
Or do you want to have a call at some point and talk about it?
That's a possibility, and I should talk to Gene more about that. I mean, we've already started that section, and we have. I don't know that Gene has had time to fully review the report that was put out. I know she thumbed through it like I did.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we can integrate. I mean, certainly we recognize and will recognize that information is out there. My thinking at this point, looking at what we're trying to get accomplished, we don't have time at the moment to kind of integrate and go back to the HCM we have and in the GSP talk about any differences.
Yeah, no, I'm not suggesting that. I'm completely open.
Yep.
I just wondered if you've given it any thought because, again, it's a state-funded project, and I know the state's going to expect some kind of recognition, I would suspect.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's
right.
Yeah, a good
regarding
point.
how that data gets used in the GSP.
I think we're on the same page there.
Can I answer that?
Go ahead.
I'd like to answer it a little bit. So the person that I'm having work on that section, I gave her that report so that she incorporates, she looks at it. She also has a number of other of the geology reports. But I told her she could quote it, even though it was draft. And then we will be reviewing it at that point, because I do think a lot of very good work got put into it, Tim. I want to thank you for pulling together, especially all the geology, and then what I am waiting for, though, is the TAC's review of the interpretation of the geophysics, because I think that's important before we use some of the geophysics interpretation, but we are referencing your general the general description that you have put together, and
Okay.
I don't see any disagreement with that. So is the TAC? I know this might not be the actual time to do it, but at some point we do want to hear from the TAC about that report.
That sounds
Right.
like
So
a good
do we-
idea. So we need to have at least the information again ready, resent to the TAC. So if that can be given to me, and then to Steve, this is the HCM stuff.
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
also
okay.
the request.
Yeah, well,
You've already
Steve,
got it.
contact me if you need anything from me on that, but it seems like,
good.
Yeah, and because we'd like to wrap that up, we'd like to get comments from the TAC and address whatever we can with the budget we have and finalize it. And then we're hoping that with TAC input, that we're not expecting any kind of an adoption, but at least some sort of an acceptance would be appropriate.
Makes it easier to put it in the GSP too, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think also, in the data gap section, we're kind of ahead of the curve because we've got this sort of comprehensive HCM that's, utilizing some of the SkyTIM data that I think what's going to happen is, GSP gets submitted, we're out there, doing our thing, and then there's going to be periodic updates, and a lot of that HCM data is going to be refined. And I, if I could put on my magic hat and look into the future, that HCM is probably going to help revise some of the existing groundwater model that's been done. So I think it's key to touch on that several times in the in the GSP. So because it's like almost you have data gaps, but we've kind of already filled them. It's just the timing of it.
I think that's exactly how I was looking at it. Is frankly, Gene and DRI and other people on our staff are writing up sections of all this now of what we've done. Mm-hmm. It's going to be hard to incorporate anything new going forward. But what we can note is the work that's being done, what's been done so far, what's going to be done by the Brackish Water Group. And we do have data gaps. The model can be improved.
Right.
We'll discuss all that and say there's going to be a point at which we're going to review all of it and look at what we need to do as far as revising the model. And those will all be pieces of it.
And I think that's going to help DWR when they're reviewing our GSP, because we're going to have, we mentioned it, we have the data that we're ready to use. It's just the timing wasn't there. Yep. So I think that's going to help our case.
Yep.
Which is not the case in, I think, any other basin. So that's a good thing.
It is a good thing. Yep.
All right. Any other comments from committee members? All right. Well, I'll go ahead and ask the public if you have any questions or comments. And this is on the GSP report update.
Right. I got the title, Adam. Dave Janis, PAC Chair. As I got a copy of this earlier today, or actually yesterday, with regards to the PAC agenda, because it's on the PAC agenda tonight. And a couple things screamed out at me, including the delays we're currently suffering in picking the next scenario. But if you look at the April, in April we have 2 chapters coming out. In June we have 2 chapters coming out the day after the PAC and TAC meet, and then 2 more in July. So the August meeting is going to have at least 4 chapters if we maintain the schedule to do all at once, because we had to move the July TAC and PAC up to the week prior because of the 4th of July. The July time would have been the 4th, and we are dedicated, but we're not going to entirely ruin our summer, nor is the TAC, nor Stetson in this case. So the suggestion would be, we raised at the last GA or the one before it, that the schedule compression might be leading to a couple interim or temporary PAC and TAC meetings in between the regular scheduled times. And I think it's time to look at the schedule now and start setting those ahead so people can work their summer calendars around this, because this is going to be a hot summer, what we're looking at. And I think we're more effective if we can give you quick review and feedback than if we're doing 4 months or 3 months and 6 or 4, whichever it turns out to be, sets of reviews. So it may be at this time, to help maintain that we're going to have a quorum for each of the PAC and the TAC, that we, each time we come to one of these meetings, we nail down an interim set. And I don't know if you agree with that, Adam, for the TAC, but I see a problem coming for the summer.
It's going to be.
Thank you. And yeah, I do agree with some of that. There is a lot coming up. The timing is getting, it's been shifted once again already, and there's a lot that does need to be done. And there's going to be a lot of people taking vacations and time off during June and July. And
Not
so,
my people.
Yes. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I just think if we could set it in now, it would mitigate some of the issues for people planning their vacations.
Good.
Thanks.
Yes, it will. Thank you.
You could probably lump sections 2 and 3 together. I mean, I'm just thinking about trying to ways to get rid of lines, you know. You could probably lump those together as one document. Section 7 is easy. Section 6 is really easy. I mean, the tough ones are section 4 and 5. The rest of it is really not. Yeah. I mean, as far as technical content, I mean, you know, yeah.
Policy.
You're right. That's true. It'll all be complicated. Then never mind. I take it back.
All right. I think that is all set and done for item number 3. Item number 4, this should be quick and easy. It's listed what we have set up for May. Not much changes, but we've already discussed the additional possibilities that we will have scenario 3 done, set, and ready to go for us to then review and give our comments on for that change in the modeling scenario. But everything else there, the network data gap status report. And then we also have undesirable results, minimum thresholds, and measurable objectives. I think members of this group will be very happy that that's there for discussion. And the interim milestones.
Yes.
Once again, implementation options will be there, and the GSP report update. Thank you. And then when I set up the agenda and we have any changes, you'll give those to me, of course, and then we'll have that set up and ready. Yep. Future dates, May 2nd, June 6th, and as was just mentioned to us, the July 4th is being switched to June 27th. All right. We'll go ahead. That was item number 5. And then item number 6, water resource managers, their members for announcements or other comments, and then, of course, TAC members' comments.
I think I've said enough, so I'm done.
Thank you very much, Steve. All right, TAC members.
I just wanted to bring up the sort of the Freeman Gulch and the idea of maybe trying to put together a small group to see if we can kind of cobble together some kind of project to see if we can get some wells equipped, and as these releases happen, then we know, hey, it's not being recharged, or it is. So I don't know what the next steps would be to do that, but I think it's important to get those, you know, handful of wells equipped if we can. So I don't know if it's something I can just initiate and then get a small group together, or do we need a vote from somebody, or how does that work?
Yeah, we're fully supportive of you taking the lead.
Okay.
Okay.
There you are. Because I think it's really important too.
Right.
We're here, but we're quite a ways away.
Sure. I just thought let's take advantage of
but to get people together and try to get this done, to get it documented and get it as effective as possible where this water goes, and for future is good. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. Fully supportive.
Don, is that something you'd be interested in kind of being involved with? Okay, I don't want to leave anybody out, but
Don's a diva. No, both sides.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I know this stuff,
All right.
for sure.
I'll circulate an email. I'm not sure if I'm breaking the Brown Act,
Put
but I'll
together
make
a
sure.
poll maybe.
Yeah, okay.
For sure.
Yeah,
Right.
in that manner.
I'd like to go on that too.
Oh, we can't hear you there.
Oh, sorry. I'd like to get involved with that too, when you
Okay.
put together your field work.
Can be on cheap, but yeah, okay.
Yeah.
No
Eddie, are
comment?
you going to be sending that out to all of the
I don't know.
TAs and
I
members?
gotta. I don't know how it
Or
works.
just
Yeah,
go
I
through
don't-
Steve first and then move forward on that.
I'll come up with a plan.
Okay. Okay, Don?
I have an observation. I don't know what happened this time, but the package of slides that was distributed through Mr. Janis to the PAC should have also been distributed to the TAC, and it was not. And I wouldn't have had access to it except my favorite PAC member gave it to me. So whatever happened, I'm sure it was unintentional, but it's important to get the materials out to all of us as quickly as possible.
Which item was it, Don?
Which item? The whole package. That's not just PAC material. That was presented today right here.
You didn't get this package?
No.
Electronically.
No, that's what I'm talking about. We got nothing except an agenda. Came from Lauren.
All right, any other comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to, we had GRA had a legislative committee or legislative symposium last week. And one of the things that was discussed was the Prop 1 planning and implementation grants that are going to be available. There's supposed to be a draft PSP, a proposal solicitation package, for $50 million in additional planning grant opportunities coming out in the spring this year. And the way they put it was that this would be available first priority to those GSPs or GSAs that haven't gotten planning money, and that's really the ones that have submitted alternatives and they were rejected, which have not been rejected yet, but that's supposed to happen very soon. So I don't know if there's additional money needed here, but that might be one avenue. So it might be worth following up with DWR. There is $100 million in implementation grants that are going to be available, PSP coming out at the beginning of next year. So that should be part of the implementation of this GSP to apply for implementation grants. They aren't a small effort to put together. And there were also some integrated regional water management program monies that are going to be available, and I can send you the details on those, but just to make it brief. But and that's both general planning and implementation. Also, there's like $750 million in water quality related stuff, which this has water quality available as well. So,
Okay, thank you. Don? All right.
I have one last item. For any of those in the audience that would like a copy of the domestic well owners sustainability plan, just approach me after we close out here. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I will go ahead and offer one last opportunity for the public. If you have any comments or questions, please come on up. Okay. I then officially will say, do we have a motion?
Yes.
To finish this meeting?
And you have a second.
And a second. All right. We are adjourned till the next meeting.